Good morning and welcome to the VST weekly roundup. This week it's Kenny Hodges and me, Barsha Versarian. We're rolling back some exciting action that we had this week. Some league implications are starting to come into play, and it's just an exciting time for football. Just jumping right into the quick hits. We'll start out in the Valley Mission. Sylmar visited Canoga Park, and Canoga did what they've been doing. Came out 34-21. Kennedy hosted Franklin in what was viewed as a big test for them. Franklin came out on top 42-13. Panorama hosted Reseda, and Reseda got points. They did a little bit, but Panorama did what they were supposed to. It was 36-8 there. And Van Nuys went into San Fernando, and San Fernando got back to their winning ways, 39-12. Over in the East Valley League, Pauley went into Verdugo Hills and ruined homecoming, 34-0. Grant went to Monroe and got shut out. It was 20-0 there. And Chavez went into North Hollywood and gave him a scare. Punched him in the mouth, but North Hollywood held on. It was 34-22. And in the West Valley League, Taft went into Cleveland and put up a fight. That came out 40-36. Cleveland held on. El Camino went to Chatsworth and held on. It was a pretty good battle. They came out on top 28-19. In our VST game of the week, Granada Hills visited Birmingham, and that was a nail biter. 29-28 was the final, and Birmingham holding on. We had some Southern Section action we were keeping an eye on. Campbell Hall was looking to continue their undefeated start to the season as they get into a tough final 2 games in their league. They came out on top 54-0. Village Christian looking to get back in the winning ways after a tough loss to Aquinas. They went in the Big Bear and came out on top 6-0. Speaking of Aquinas, they hosted Heritage Christian, Village's big rival, and Heritage didn't show much. It was a 56-6 final for Aquinas. And the last one we were looking at in the Southern section, Calabasas went into Simi Valley and came out 39-32.
So some quick notes I have, starting in the East Valley, where the title picture is starting to kind of come into shape a little bit. The top is starting to separate from the bottom a little bit, and you're starting to see which teams are kind of going to be there at the end. You're seeing North Hollywood continuing their torrid pace to the beginning of the season. They had a scare out there in Chavez, which I told everybody, you go out there to play that team, you better expect a battle. And that's exactly what NoHo got. Ronnie Gibson kind of had to pull their butts out of the fire at the end to kind of keep that win streak rolling and keep them unblemished in the top of the East Valley. Same thing with Monroe. Monroe did what you expected. You wanted to see them do. If they were going to have a shot to win this league, the teams that are kind of sitting in the middle, they got to beat up on them. And this is 2 weeks in a row, but we've seen them since they bounced back from our leader loss, where they went and put 2 consecutive complete fourth quarter efforts together. And they've now positioned themselves, if they cannot fall into that pitfall when they play Chavez next week, they seem like they might have a real shot at taking the East Valley when they can, not control their destiny because they lost our leader, but they've got a chance to really kind of put a real stake in a claim for that East Valley in 2 weeks when they go to see North Hollywood. In the Valley Mission, same thing. You're starting to kind of see the cream rise to the top a little bit. Panorama put together a good performance against Reseda, but like I said, we know where Reseda's at these days. They're kind of in a rebuilding form, but give credit to the Pythons. You gotta beat who's in front of you, and they have won 7 out of their 8 contests this year. They're 7-1. They're the only team in the Valley with 7 wins so far this year. Kennedy took a shot at a good Franklin team. Didn't come out on the winning end. They got beat up a little bit. We'll see if they can kind of regroup when they have to go and take on Canoga Park for homecoming next week. San Fernando kind of got back to their winning ways. They got back to 500 in the Valley Mission. And like we talked about with Canoga continues to kind of turn their season around after the slow start. They got out of blocks 0-4, but now in the league, they're 3-0, and they look like they're kind of putting it together. And the West Valley, the league that we know is going to be battles every week, 76 points combined for Taft and Cleveland. Kind of tells you what that game was a bit of a track meet. And Taft, to their credit, like I've talked about all year, they've had it's been a tough go every week, having to go travel to somebody else's building and try to win a game. They put up a good fight, but the Cavs did what they needed to do to kind of get things back on track in the West Valley when they've got some big matchups coming up. Elko, I've been touting them all year, and they've proven me right. 4-game win streak now for Elko, still unbeaten in the West Valley, and they look every bit as dangerous and to be able to challenge those teams that we think are going to be there at the top in the West Valley. And we're going to get into what was a game that kind of lived up to the hype of being the game of the week, and that 1-point victory for Birmingham over Granada Hills Charter. And in the West and in the Southern section, the one real note I have is that Campbell Hall looks great. It's going to be interesting to see how things kind of shake out for them, where they'll end up seeding wise in the playoffs. But this is a team that you better bring 4 quarters of effort against them, because they've definitely got the horses and the players to kind of make your life miserable. And also for Calabasas, that was a game, haven't had a chance to speak to their coaching staff. They were really excited about the way those kids played, because Simi Valley to them was a litmus test for if they're going to be able to hang with teams like Oaks Christian and St. Bonaventure in the next couple of weeks. So they wanted to put together a complete effort against a tough Simi Valley team, and they did so. So it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on them the next couple of weeks, because the Oaks Christian game and the St. Bonaventure game are going to be tough games for them to try to win, but they've got the players to be able to play with those teams.
Yeah, they do. And it's shaping up to be an interesting stretch. The last 3 weeks of the season coming up, and there is some stories that are unfolding that just kind of make us get excited. And it's got me week in and week out just looking at the schedule like, here we go. I want more. And speaking of one more, you were talking about seeing Campbell Hall. We've been talking about Campbell Hall. Hadn't been able to go and see them, but I finally had a chance to go out and get eyeballs on them. And they have some talent. Right off the bat, they've got some size, and that immediately kind of made sense as to why they were 6-0, 7-0 coming into the game. And just kind of watching them pregame, watching them go through, it was homecoming, so there was some electricity in the air, and I was thinking, we could be seeing a team just kind of ride one out, and they didn't waste any time. They got a 3-and-out, and the Viewpoint, got to give them credit. These kids played their heart out. This coaching staff is building them up. It's tough when you're playing a game and you feel like you're outmatched before you start. And some of these kids, went out there and it seemed like they were expecting to lose. And I don't like saying that. I don't like building it up that way, but it just kind of felt like they were already setting themselves up. And, here comes the 3-and-out, and they go in a punt, and the punt was for negative yards. Didn't get back to the line of scrimmage. Shanked. And so what happens? You're going to take it in and score if you're a good team. That's what you expect to do. And that's what they did. Campbell Hall went in and scored, and they had a couple of the plays defensively where they just stepped up at the right time, took the ball away, and they had 2 interception returns for touchdown of 30 yards. One was 31, one was 30. And at that point, you kind of look and you go, okay, it's going to be academic from here. They're going to kind of work the clock out. So it's kind of hard to really look at these kids, on Campbell Hall and say, well, I think so-and-so is going to be, a big threat at the next level and whatnot. But I mean, talking to coach afterwards, they've got the kid who is receiving 2 offers from military programs. And once the offers become official, we'll be able to talk about it more. But they're coming, and so they've been watching. And what I would like to do is just keep pumping these kids. There's definitely kids in these programs that can do things. Now, I don't have the name of the kid, but there's a freshman at Viewpoint, and he was plugged in when the game got out of hand, sitting in strong safety, and he had the good kind of happy feet. He was just chomping at the bit to get in. Ball gets snapped, and his first play, he's over there trying to stick his nose and knock out the running back. A couple plays later, he gets his chance, and you're talking learning positioning. He's a freshman in the position. His feet, his lower body was kind of off kilter, and it turned into an arm tackle. And he got, they broke the tackle. The runner actually took it 48 yards and scored. But that freshman, the rest of the game, I was keyed in on him. What was he doing? He was locked in. He was nervous as heck. But he was locked in and doing what you want someone to do when their number's called. And that's go out there and leave it on the field. And that's what he was doing. I mean, ultimately, you look at the score, you go, oh, yeah, 54-0 Campbell Hall. But the internal storylines were what drew me. You look at some of these freshmen at Viewpoint getting playing time. The freshman at Campbell Hall played almost the entire second half. So what do these freshmen have now? They have game experience, in-game, real experience. And that's only going to help them next week. It's only going to help them next 2 weeks. It's only going to help them when they get into the next part of the program in the off season. It makes me want to see them more. Just excited about what can happen.
And that's the thing. You go into a game like that where the obvious story is Campbell Hall crushes Viewpoint. But sometimes you look deeper into the story and you kind of pull those things out of it. What did you want to see from Viewpoint? We weren't expecting Viewpoint to go beat this team. You wanted to see where the fight was going to come from. You wanted to see the glimmers of, can we start to build something at this program in the next 2-3 years? Because we're young and our kids don't know their behinds from their elbows a lot of the time. But are there some pieces here we can kind of build some things behind? And it sounds like you got a lot of that from the Viewpoint side. And from the Campbell Hall side, okay, you were supposed to stomp this team. You show everybody that that 7-0 that you were when you came into this game. All right, we're going to come in. We're going to put a number on these kids because that's what you're supposed to do. You don't slip up. You don't take an opponent lightly. You step on the gas. You do what you have to do. And there are some players on that Campbell Hall team. Like, this is not a 7-0 that's just, oh, that's a weak schedule. No, they've played some teams that are capable of giving you a game, and they've knocked down everybody that they've seen so far this year. So it's interesting to me because I think a lot of the feeling around when you hear the name Campbell Hall, you think of that basketball program. You think of some of their other programs. You don't think football first. But a season like this kind of starts to change that narrative a little bit. We play ball here too. Like, we're not just a part of the southern section that's tucked away in Studio City that you're going to drive past us when you're on your way up to go see Harvard Westlake. No, we play ball down here too. So it's good to see that football in general in the Valley, even those parts of the southern section, are starting to thrive a little bit. Heritage had a bad week, but we've talked about how they've looked good at times. Village has looked good at times, but we know there are bigger things for them in the future. But it's good to see a team like Campbell Hall kind of establishing itself this year as like, nope, we're going to try to do everything we can this year, but we're building this thing to be bullies for the next couple of years on this end of the southern section.
You know, you were at a game that was going to either solidify some league implications or shake them up, because Sylmar is not a team to be taken lightly, and Canoga was looking to solidify itself as a title contender this season.
So
take it away.
The story going in this game is, okay, we know what Kennedy is supposed to be in terms of the Valley mission this year. That's the team that everybody coming into the year, we assume that's the team everybody was going to chase. What I wrote in the league preview coming into the season, though, was while Kennedy is that team that's to beat, Canoga, even with losing a lot of players from that team that gave it a run for its money to try to win that league last year, they still had a lot of senior leadership left, even if it was in smaller numbers. That band of brothers is veterans. They're rugged. They're tough. And you've kind of seen them start to show their teeth when they got in the league play, even though they had a tough non-league in which they, similar to like Birmingham, they got beat up a little bit in their non-league. But you knew that when it came time to league play, they were going to show their mettle because this is a team that's been here before. They've been through the ringer. On the other side of the field, you had this Sylmar team who they're young. They're still building that program. They're still building that thing up. But they're going to give teams a run for their money every week because they've got some players. They've got some ballers on that team for the Spartans. So the way this game started, that's exactly what you saw play out. Titans down on those offensive and defensive fronts, doing battle right off the bat. And for Sylmar, the game plan was simple. If you've paid attention to what Corey Rule did his first two games in the league, is he basically ran over his opponents to the tune of 650 yards in his first two league games. So if you were Sylmar, you'd be out of your mind to not be keyed on that kid from the outset of that game. And that's exactly what they were. Their defensive front was very impressive in being able to kind of cave in an offensive line that is veteran across the board and with some big boys. But they did everything they could to kind of set those edges and not let Corey Rule get going and make a mess of the game. Now, because he's a tremendous talent, he was able to break one in the first half. He did break a 67-yarder at the beginning of towards the end of the first quarter. But they did a really good job kind of bottling him up in that first half. The other thing that was impressive about Sylmar is while the nature of that team is to be a bit rugged up front, they have a quarterback that can throw the ball a little bit. And he's got a couple of weapons that he can go to on the outside. So when they came out initially, their game plan was to try to run the ball and Canoga's front. The Hunters were hunting. right off the bat, and they kind of contained Madrano and any kid that was trying to they were trying to get to the edges and they couldn't do it. Well, they kind of threw the run game out the window and said, all right, well, we're just going to sling it. And I sent you a text towards at halftime and said, I didn't know that Sylmar was running, had the old Jim Kelly 1990s run and gun offense where they would just go to step back and they were just going to sling it all over the place, because they did. And it wasn't as if some teams kind of have maybe a pet play or two in their passing attack that they're just going to kind of go to and maybe rotate those two things. No, they were running bubble screens. They were running slants. They had guys running posts. Like, it was a full-fledged aerial assault that they went to put on Canoga, where they said, okay, if you guys are going to sit this close to the line of scrimmage and load the box, our quarterback is good enough to where we can kind of throw that ball in and behind you. And they did in the end of the second quarter, which led to them getting on the board and taking a 7-6 lead in the halftime. It was exactly where Sylmar would have wanted to be. You're on the road. You're trying to establish yourself as a team that can kind of go in and beat anybody in the league and be a credible threat to the league. Taking a 7-6 lead over a tough Canoga team who's been hot the last couple of weeks was right where you wanted to be. But that's where this game, to me, kind of took a turn on its head, where one of the underlying themes of this game was that veteran leadership of Canoga Park versus that youth and exuberance on the Sylmar side. Coach Perez said to me after the game, he basically said, hey, listen, every quarter we look at with this group, we look at it as 0-0, no matter what it says on the scoreboard. And the way we figure we're going to win games is what can we do in this quarter to kind of separate ourselves and kind of put a number on the team so where we can pin our ears back and do the things that we want to do to kind of put games away, which is what you expect from senior-laden teams. They took the ball in the beginning of the second half, went on a nice long drive. They marched it down the field. And because now that Corey Ruel was starting to find the edge a little bit, now he's shifty. He's getting into the second level and he's making some plays. And he led them down the field and they took the lead 14-6. Where this game turned, well, the game turned in a couple of ways. The obvious way that the game turned was after Canoga took that lead to go up 14-7, the very next play, Sylmar turns the ball over. It was their only turnover of the game. It was the only turnover of the game for either team because both teams played relatively clean in that aspect. We'll get into some of the penalties that started to ensue after that. But it was the only real mistake of the game. And Sylmar turned the ball over deep in their own end. And Canoga did what a good senior-laden team is supposed to do. Boom, they took it right down the field. All of a sudden, a game that was 7-6 at halftime, and a blink, Sylmar looks, and now they're down 21-7. To their credit, they continued to fight in that game. They actually got it back to 21-14 before Canoga then kind of extended the lead with another good drive to make the game 27-14. But then the other aspect of how this game kind of turned on its head. Because it's a league matchup, these teams know each other. These kids kind of know each other. You got to expect there's going to be some talking on the field. There's going to be some chippiness. There's going to be a little extra that goes on after the whistle or right before the end of the whistle. A couple of blocks in the back, couple of, wham bam thank yous. And you could see that the Sylmar kids started to lose their heads a little bit. They started to get more concerned with some get back and paying back on some receipts that they felt like they were getting, and they took them out of their game plan a little bit. And you could see the Canoga kids started to lean into that a little bit, give a shove or two after the whistle, because you could tell that some of these Sylmar kids were starting to kind of get sick of it and wanted to kind of wanted to take some shots at them. And once you get in that place in the game, the way you're doing that, and you're more concerned with getting at somebody or wanting to fight somebody after a whistle, you're not worrying about gap integrity now, which is going to help Corey Ruel get outside and do the things that he needs to do. You're worrying about Terrence knocking somebody's head off, and now DePaz is getting open and he's catching balls and running slants and getting open over the middle. So because they kind of lost their edge a little bit, Canoga was really able to kind of sink in and cement the game, and Sylmar could just never recover because they were playing from behind. Play of the game, obviously, is Corey Ruel. They did a really good job of containing him in that first half. He only had the one big play that was their only score in the first half. But in the second half, when he was able to kind of find his way to the edges of the defense, he started to really do the things that we've seen him do in the last couple of games that they played. He's a dynamic playmaker for them, but also got to give him credit because on the defensive side of the ball, he will stick his nose in there because he plays out on the edge. He's the corner. You run that ball outside, he's going to stick his nose in there, even if he is one of the smaller guys on the field. He's a bulldog. He's going to stick his nose in there, and he's going to put you down too. So his toughness was on full display in that second half, running through tacklers, stiff-arming guys, making plays, getting on the outside, and what felt like a pedestrian sort of half in the first half. By the time we got to the end of the game, this kid had 22 carries, 226 yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 3 catches for 32 yards, another score through the air. So he finished with 258 scrimmage yards and 3 touchdowns. So it just continuing that trend of, even though it was a slow start this year for them offensively, they've kind of found something in going through him on the offensive side of the ball, and they ended up winning this game 34-21. The interesting thing to come out of this game now is it's all on the table now for Canoga. It's all there. It's set up exactly how they want it, because now they've got Kennedy coming in next week, and it's their homecoming. They're going to host their game. The energy in there is going to be great in there, because when they even announced that it was homecoming versus Kennedy for first place, the place erupted. It roared. It roared louder for that than any of the touchdowns that were scored. So it just kind of tells you where the supporters and the students and the faculty and the alums, what they understand what next week probably means for them winning the league title for these seniors who were being honored on senior night. It's a chance for them to kind of be able to raise a title by the end of the season. So good on Canoga.
Yeah, no, that's massively huge. And I was lamenting about it a few weeks ago, how a program that was the standard bearer, back when I was involved in the Sunset Six, and right when the first season of the East Valley League, Canoga Park was the team to go through. And they were a proud program. And looking at what's happening, I'm personally happy that they're there. They're in this position. There's a team that really can and should keep finding ways to stay relevant. And I don't like saying that because it's high school ball. But you want them to be in the picture. You want them to be competitive. If nothing other than the fact that these kids now can be like, well, our school has this pedigree and we get to keep it. And then moving into one of the other games we were keeping an eye on out in the West Valley, El Camino visited Chatsworth. And that game was my chance to get eyes on both El Camino and Chatsworth. You've seen them. Kaylee has seen them. And it didn't disappoint. First off, we're talking about Isaiah Ramo. He's been in conversation about what he's done, how many teams he's run over, and right off the bat, he was held to 11 yards in the first half. But I'll get into the rest of that as we go. This game was tight throughout. You look at the final score, it was a 2-score difference, but it was tight throughout. You have a bad snap, and you can't convert the extra point, and then El Camino blocks a field goal attempt, extra point attempt. And so those 2 points take this game from being a 1-score game to a 2-score game. And the game is just as close as when you look at it being, one touchdown. And it really was just that. El Camino came out and scored quickly. But aside from that, they kind of played the Chatsworth role in this one. How many times this season have we talked about Chatsworth being frustrating and having penalties, calling back big plays and runs, and then you watch the body language of Ramo at that point. It's like, how much more do I need to do? Chatsworth only committed 5 penalties the whole game. Only 1 offensive penalty the entire game. And so that allowed him to, get out and do what he does. But El Camino had 12 penalties in the first half. And they finished the game with 17 penalties for something around 200 yards. That hurts. That's painful. They had a 40-yard run by their quarterback called back. And he didn't get in the end zone, but it was big, and it would have put him in position to do things. And it was a pretty big blindside block. And then they had a 20-yard touchdown called back because there was an illegal man downfield. That's just mental mistakes. They had a kickoff return for a touchdown called back. And then the kid was gone. Called back. So that was their first half. I mean, just epitomized. They had 5 offensive penalties in the first quarter. But on the flip side, they capitalized when they needed to capitalize. And this is where you look at this team and you look at them, and they're a well-coached team. These coaches stay on point. And what did they do? El Camino capitalized the first chance they had. Now they scored, kicked the ball off. It bounced in front of Ramo inside the 10. And I thought, Isaiah's gone. He got into the scrum and out of the scrum, and he was going down the numbers on the El Camino side of the field. And all of a sudden, he was getting caught. And I realized he slowed down. He thought he was going to walk into the end zone. So he started to slow down, and El Camino defender came in, got him mid-tackle, turned him around, and while turning him around, stripped the ball. I don't have the numbers, but I don't think Ramos fumbled much at all this season. But they took the ball away from him there. And yeah, they had to march the field, but what did they do? They took advantage of a turnover that would have tied the game, and now they're up 14-0. And well-coached teams will take advantage of those moments. Another one, I think it was late in the half. Chatsworth goes in, scores in the second quarter, gets on the board, and then takes the ball back. Their defense did the job. They forced the 3 and out. And here comes the punt. And you talk about focus. Some of these kids learning positions, didn't play the punt properly, and it was muffed. El Camino jumps on, and what do? Almost immediately go to the field and score. And so now you're talking about a one-score game back to a two-score game. It was 21-6. And that's the way you would go into halftime. But right before halftime, and I really wanted to kind of talk about this because you hate to see someone get hurt. You hate to see serious injuries, especially at this level. And so I want to put out, my wishes to Anthony Hernandez. You know, playing hard. Unfortunate, he went down on a punt return, and he broke his ankle. So from me, from our staff, we want to wish him a speedy recovery. Hopefully there's no complications. Hopefully everything works out. I know I'll check in with Coach Street to see how he's doing. Just our well wishes to him. You never want to see anyone come down like that. Especially at this level, these kids are playing a game they love. So just definitely wanted to make sure we put that out there for him. And interesting enough, it felt almost like the team rallied around him. They've got a couple seniors. Chatsworth is still very young, but they've got a couple seniors who lead that team, and they took charge, and they rallied this team together. And they had the option to call the half right there. They decided to come out, and they're going to finish the half. They're going to come out and play for their fallen brother. And that's exactly what they did. And Chatsworth received the ball in the second half, and something clicked. Like I said, Ramo was held to 11 yards in the first half. He went off and almost couldn't be stopped in the second half. His first carry in the second half was for 20 yards. And he did it. I mean, he finished the game with 205 yards and 2 touchdowns, which means he had 194 yards in the second half alone. And I think I read this off to you earlier, but he had a stretch of runs where it was 26, 19, 20, 19, 25. Just big chunk after big chunk after big chunk. And one of those 19-yarders was a score. And the game was close. But like I said, every time something was working, a small Chatsworth mistake and El Camino would push the score back up. And so Chatsworth came out, made it a 1-point game with Ramo running the ball. And kind of almost like a nail, even though Chatsworth came back and made it a 1-point game again. On the kickoff early in the third, you've got a tussle in midfield. Looks like you've got a Chatsworth player getting the business given to him. And Coach Street comes out and defends his player. But he made it past the numbers practically. He got flagged. And the point is, with that kickoff, had him pinned inside the 10. So now 15 yards, you've got given El Camino good field position instead of being pinned inside the 10. And they went in and scored again. But when you were talking about these two teams kind of doing what they do, that Chatsworth defense, it held tough. Fowles had a good game for El Camino, and we've talked about him before. He had 90 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns. He had a 30-yard reception to start the game. But outside of Fowles, Chatsworth their defense was shutting him down. And El Camino, their defense did what it could, and it buckled down when it had to, and they held on for the win. So it was definitely an exciting game, and it sets them up in really, really good position with Taft coming in next week. So it sets them up. They can face that Taft team. I mean, we know Taft isn't a pushover, but and then just grow from this. There's a lot to learn from, and that's what Coach was saying after the game. But for me, that now takes us into a lot to learn from and a lot to figure out. Granada Hills went into Birmingham in our game of the week, and boy, was it a game of the week.
Before I get into the game of the week, I just want to add one little note to the end of what you were talking about with Elko and Chatsworth. One, on the Chatsworth side, the talent is there. One of these weeks, they're going to be able to put together 4 quarters of clean football, not shoot themselves in the foot. And because of how hard they play, they're going to upset someone because the talent is there to do it. On the other side of that, which leads me into the game of the week, good teams don't have to win pretty. They just have to win games. If you are a good team, you from week to week, you're going to have to figure out how to put some points on the board and stop the other team. And maybe you win in a shootout. Maybe it's ugly and it's physical, but you do the things you need to do. You take advantage of the opportunities when they come there. Like I said, they've got pieces and fouls. They've Elko's, they've got a good quarterback. That tight end, Jake Shirley, finds a way at some point every game to catch a ball and do his baby Gronk impersonation where he stiff arms a guy and then jukes on the sideline. He made sure he tagged me in whatever play it was that he made on the sideline that he looked like something that you see on SportsCenter along the sideline in that game. Or I guess LA 36 had a really good shot at one of his plays, but you do what you got to do to win a game. So in talking about this Granada and Birmingham game, which is the VST game of the week, obviously, the question going into this game is, we've known what Birmingham has done to the West Valley the last couple of years. We saw what they did the first week out against Taft, where they put up 47 on them and kind of had everybody looking around and saying, are we getting a repeat of what they've done the last couple of years when they've just kind of blown through the competition? Question going into this game was, we've seen what Granada has done this year. They have run through everybody. Their one trip and stumble was against Eagle Rock, who is also a pretty good team in the city section. But even in that game, they played them tough. Could they go into Birmingham on the road and prove what we think we know about them is that they are a team that can kind of keep up with everybody because they've got top-end talent that line up any school across the city section, and their top-end players are as good as anybody you're going to find. This game bared out just that way. Granada goes into Birmingham. Dijon Stanley's doing the things that he has done all year, which is when he gets to the second level, everybody knows the nickname. Dijon, he gone. And he did it to Birmingham just like he's done it to everybody else. And it led to them having a 14-0 lead right out of the gate. Birmingham, because they are a good squad, and like you said, you kind of throw away their non-league. You throw that non-league schedule out. You throw the baby out with the pot, because we know how tough they set their non-league up to be. And then when they get in league, because they're so battle tested from everything they've gone through in the first part of the year, when they get into the West Valley, it's like, hey, you better come on artillery because we're prepared for whatever you got. This game bared up the same way. They battled back into the contest. Peyton Waters is every bit as good as any player you'll find in the city section, and he kind of brought them back into the game. What was interesting about this game, again, great teams find a way to take advantage of an opportunity to win a game. What ultimately was the deciding point in this game, the point that was the difference between these two teams, is a lineman did not hold his water on an extra point attempt. They got flagged half the distance to the goal, and Birmingham pulled their PAT squad off the field, decided to go for two, and they ended up taking a 1-point lead. The teams exchanged punches the rest of the way, and Granada just couldn't find a way to kind of put the ball in the end zone by the end of the game, and they kind of lost the game 29-28. So now, coming out of this game, the big question is, okay, Birmingham has run through the West Valley, but you see a game like this, then the question becomes, have they come back to the backpack, or is everyone else catching up? I think the question that what we're finding out is not necessarily that they've come back to the pack, but it feels like what we've seen from the other teams, the top end teams in the West Valley, starting with Granada, because they've probably looked the best consistently from the beginning of the season and now. Okay, those teams with that talent can come into Birmingham and they can give them a game. Now we're going to see if Cleveland can do the same thing. We're going to see if El Camino can do the same thing. And they've got a chance to, because Birmingham is still a really good team, but compared to the last 2 years, they kind of look like teams might be able to capitalize on the fact that they're in a little bit of a transition. When that quarterback that's under center for them really figures it out, they're going to be really tough to deal with going forward. But right now is the time to strike. And Granada kind of showed you, the Canoga set the precedent for the rest of those good teams that they're going to see later on, that, hey, they are really good, but if we come in here and play clean, we might be able to beat them this year. And that's what I got on that game. I mean, the highlights are unbelievable. If you get a chance to go on Instagram, go on the NFHS network if you want to. You want to see a game full of guys that are going to make a difference on the D1 level when they get to college. This game is chock full of those kids, and they're right here in the Valley. But go check the highlights out, because that game lived up to the billing. If there was ever a game that you were expecting it to be nip and tuck, highlights galore, it was this game, and it lived up to the hype.
We have a couple, human highlight reels on our own, and at the moment we don't really have any of the numbers on those human highlight reels from Granada and Birmingham. So going with what we do have, our play of the week is Corey Ruel from Canoga Park. Like I said, you were talking about him. What did he do? He went
258 from scrimmage.
Yeah.
3 touchdowns, 2 on the ground, 1 in the air, 226 on the ground, in a game in which everyone knows you might as well just hold up a sign saying he's number one is getting the ball. Come put 8 guys up front and try to stop him, and he still got over 200 on the ground.
And that takes me to honorable mentions. Gabriel Argot at Kennedy. A game that they lost pretty handily, and that's, you look at the scoreboard. But he took the ball 22 times, had 148 yards on the ground. That's respectable.
And those Kennedy kids, I've touted them all year, from Gore Abrahamian to Argot, to my boy Lonzo over there, the bubble screen master. But even in a losing effort, even in the game when they played against Cleveland, they come at you for 4 quarters. So I'm not surprised at all that even in a losing effort, a kid like Argot just is going to keep coming at you. So yeah, I agree. I agree with him getting honorable mention this week.
And the last one on the list is Isaiah Rema. I mean, again, 194 yards in the second half after being held to 11 in the first. You know, and just like with Corey Roy, who is Chatsworth going to give the ball to? Isaiah Rema. 99% of the time, it's going to be him. And he found his way, 205 yards. He had 2 receptions for 21 yards, trying to work in a new wrinkle. So 226 yards total and 2 touchdowns. I hate to say it, but if he doesn't slow down, he's got his 3rd touchdown in that first quarter, and maybe things are different, but still, that's those numbers are good enough. Honorable mention, and kind of look forward to what he can do, kind of moving forward. And on that, we'll see you all when we do our next wrap up. We'll see you next week, and have a good one.
Peace.